Good morning to you all and welcome back to the beautiful city of Shanghai, China, our gracious host of the 15th World Wushu Championships. We are coming to you live from the Minhang Indoor Stadium, 50,000 square meters and designed to accommodate 7,000 spectators. Over 1,000 athletes have traveled from more than 100 countries and regions to compete for global recognition. Today is day 2 of 4 of the 15th World Wushu Championships. Hosted by the International Wushu Federation, the World Wushu Championships is the highest level of international competition within the sport of Wushu. This biennial event began in 1991, features both explosive full contact combat in Sanda bouts and dynamic movements and distinct weaponry of Taolu form competitions. I am Anthony Chen, former U.S. Wushu team athlete and international judge for Wushu. And here with me, I have former Canadian Wushu team champion, Alan Tang. We will be your hosts for the Taolu carpets this morning at the 15th World Wushu Championships. Alan, very good here to be with you today.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Direct here from Shanghai at this 15th World Wushu Championships. We have just introduced the judges for this morning's events. So far, we have seen 7 of 27 Taolu events, including yesterday in field of play number 1, we had the men's Daoshu, which is the broadsword event, as well as having the women's Nanquan, Jianshu, and Baguazhang in field of play number 2. Also completed in field of number 1 yesterday was the men's Nanquan, which was an awesome event featuring over 50 amazing competitors from around the world. And then in field of play number 2 yesterday, we finished off the men's traditional Xingyi Chuan in addition to the women's Taiji Jian. Now, what do we have this morning in field of play number 1, Anthony?
So yeah, Alan, we have over 89 competitors competing in a men's Changquan, one of the most competitive
events in Wushu competition. That's right.
Correct. So we've seen more than half of these competitors already, half of them competing in men's Daosu, which is broadsword, and later on we'll be seeing them compete in men's straight sword.
As we begin this morning's events, we have the march-in of the athletes. These are some of the representing athletes in this morning's men's Changquan, or long fist bare hand routine, as they bow in to salute to the head judge. And under protocol, the start list is provided and checked by the head judge. The athletes salute and prepare for competition. Typically, the long fist or the Changquan event is almost like the 100 dash of athletics. It's, so to speak, the benchmark of Wushu competition. One of the most competitive events. The majority of athletes who participate in both the straight sword and the broadsword, the staff and the spear, they all mainly compete in the Changquan event for their bare hand, which is why we see over 89 athletes in this morning's lineup. Who do we have in the starting rotation, Anthony?
So first up, we have from Chinese Taipei, Chen Mingwang. We've already seen him compete yesterday in men's Daosu, where he placed 5th.
A very, very strong competitor. He was 3rd in Changquan.
In just the Chengdu tournament this year.
And that was
just a month ago.
That was the, which competition was that?
The Chengdu Masterships.
Okay, I see.
And he's always been a top 3 finisher at the Taolu World Cup, which takes the top 8 athletes from all World Wushu Championships.
Now he's going to perform first at this morning's event. Having so many competitors, how does that affect an athlete's preparation?
Well, definitely when the first competitor comes up, he's going to set the benchmark for where the scores are going to be.
So let's see if the pressure gets to him, but we're looking for a very, very strong performance by the Taipei competitor. He sets up with one of the required movements, which is a balance, or we say long duration balance, followed by a 720-degree outside jump kick.
And we've seen him compete or perform that sea-level movement just in Taolu as well.
And a 360-degree inside jump kick into a split landing. The Changquan event, like the other Taolu events, is an optional routine which is based on the choreography of the athlete, but includes compulsory combination movements, difficulty components, all done within a time frame of
a minute 20. And that's right, Alan. There are required movements in which all athletes have to perform. And we've already seen some sweeps, some straight leg kicks, and some snaps, as well as that long time bounce you were mentioning.
So what makes up a barehanded routine are the attacks, the offensive movements, the defensive movements, the strikes, the kicks, put together with acrobatic elements, which are called difficulty components in wushu competition.
And that was a strong performance by Chenming Wang of Taipei.
So with the difficulty component, we have 3 groups of judges who will be giving or deducting marks during the performance. The Group A judges are in charge of the quality of movements. They look at the technicality and required movements and whether or not the athlete performs them up to the technical merits. They're in charge of deducting marks when they see errors. The Group B judges are the judges in charge of the overall performance. So they give a mark out of 5 and they provide a mark which determines what they feel is the overall performance or the impression that the athlete gives during the competition. Then, last but not least, there are the Group C judges, which are the difficulty component judges, and they are on a deduction basis. So they look at the makeup of the difficulty components in an athlete's routine, and they judge it based on whether or not they complete the rotations, they complete the landings of these difficulty components, and whether or not they accomplish them without errors. And if they do have errors, then out of the judges, the majority of them have to agree upon it, and a mark is deducted or is remained and given to the athlete. How many marks are in each group, Anthony?
So Alan, there are in the judging panel of A, there are 3 judges who will be scoring out of a 5. And the Group B, which is a panel of 5 judges, they are scoring out of 3. And the difficulty component judges will be scoring out of 2.
And we see for our first athlete, he had 1 deduction error in Group A, which was a code 51 for his horse stance. And he achieved a very, very good Group B score and no deductions in his Group C score. His final score was
a 9.46.
46. Very good benchmark to set the standard.
And Alan, so far we've seen that the top 3 competitors were scoring well over 9.6. So we're not sure at this point if
that will hold for the duration of this long start list.
Next up from Brazil, we have Marcio de Oliveira Coutinho.
Front jump kick, aerial kick into inside jump kick. He bobbled on that landing there, so definitely he'll miss out on that transition movement. Here we see the required balance, quite shaky that he's swaying a lot, so he will get the mark or the required movement to do it, but he'll probably get deducted for the performance of that movement.
That's correct, Alan. The long time balances require 2 seconds, and the athlete has to make the balance before the 2 seconds are counted.
So he has to maintain that position in a standstill, correct?
That's correct. And in this year's World Wushu Championships, the rules now include any type of balance, but you'll see that a lot of these athletes will be doing a cross-leg balance.
So that is the cross-leg balance known as the 靠腿平衡. But as you mentioned, they're able to do other types of balance. And what might we see in those?
The other balances we might see could be anywhere from holding the kicking leg or just extending the kicking leg up to just one leg balances while leaning back.
And there we have our athlete from Brazil.
And here we see the required sweep.
And that is a drop stance. So we see there a gap between his rear thigh and calf. And that is one of the requirements which determines the appropriateness of that stance. So that is another deduction point that the judges will be looking at. We saw the replay clearly with his outside crescent kick, and it has to be above the shoulder, correct?
That's correct. For the Group A judges, will be looking for above the shoulder, while the Group C will only be checking if it's above the waist and if he makes the rotation.
So as we see his Group A score, there were several deductions for loss of balance. And as well, we have a code 30, a code 14, and a code 50. Can you reiterate that for us a little bit?
Yeah, the code 30 refers to the kicking height. And as you were saying, that is the requirement for kicking over the shoulder.
And that was probably on that movement of his outside kick where we saw it was
correct.
Below the shoulder. And what would a code 50 or a 13 be?
A code 50 refers to the bow stance, and the requirement there is that the thigh has to be parallel and the extended leg needs to be straight, and the knee cannot be over the instep.
Or should be over the instep? Or
should not be over. It needs to be over the instep.
Okay.
No more or no
and
less.
I think during one of the replays we saw it might have been a bit too wide, and that might be where the deduction comes in.
And here's our second competitor from Taipei, Ray Yu Huang. And our third competitor of the event.
There's a inside jump kick, 360-degree land into a split landing. There we see the cross-legged balance. So any little shake, the judges are really taking that into consideration as their standstill. So that's where they test the athlete out in terms of stability, balance, and whether they're able to hold that position for a 2-second period. And also there's a consideration for the height of that balance, is there not?
That's correct. The balances all have a requirement in terms of the thigh is what we're looking at, or the kicking leg, or the foot. So in that case, that thigh needs to be parallel with the floor. There we see another required sweep. And the requirement for the back sweep is, and the judges will be looking for the extended sweeping leg to be straight and the sole of the foot to be in contact throughout the whole sweep.
And there we have it. That is Ryu Yu Huang from Taipei. This is an optional jump. There we see the front jump kick, aerial kick, and the judges are looking for very straight extensions of that knee during that movement.
And so, Alan, you were talking about the optional jump. What is the benefit of having this optional jump if it does not give you any points?
Well, typically, as the athlete is choreographing their movement or for their routine, they're putting in movements that will exhibit their ability and as well perhaps their rhythm, their style of their routine. So at the end of the day, a routine is made up of a time requirement of 1 minute 20 seconds. So the athlete is trying to choreograph a routine with all of the required movements such as the stances, the strikes, the kicks, then placing in their difficulty components, but also in order to make up the completion of that, they can add in anything from additional jumps to additional combinations to different types of maneuvers that is able to showcase their ability. So sometimes what you will see is the athletes, they have particular moves that they feel that they're good at or is able to exhibit their flair or their speed or their physical prowess, and they'll put those into their routines to try to boost up their score in the overall impression category.
So in this case, you're saying that Yu Huang was trying to display his athletic abilities and his jumping.
Correct. So if the athlete is able to do those types of movements in a very, very positive way, it might boost up their mark and the overall performance, but also they do have a risk that if they fail on those maneuvers or lose balance, that it is a bit more difficult and they could lose marks on those types of additions.
And for Ray Yu Huang of Taipei, final score of 9.03. Up next we have Poland's Michał Malinowski.
Here we see him starting off with that required balance.
Here's his butterfly twist 360. And to jump inside 540, and it looks like he bobbled there, and
his foot might be outside of that boundary line.
And this carpet you were saying yesterday is 14 by 8 meters, so
yes.
The athlete needs to utilize the whole floor in his routine.
Correct. The geography of the Changquan form, we're looking at that they utilize the carpet during their performance.
And Alan, that was a long time hold. It was a bounce, correct?
The last movement he did was actually, I think, a more indication that he might have forgot his routine a little bit, or that he just was stalled. And the judges look at that and they want to see a good flow and rhythm to the routine. So that actually might affect his overall performance in a negative way. Because what makes a routine difficult is not just racing through it or going fast alone, but it is about the good rhythm, the pace of it, having slow combinations, having fast combinations to display what we call explosiveness in Wushu Taolu competition. And although Michał is performing several good combinations, he might have a bit of an issue with the rhythm or the pacing of his form. As we can see in comparison to the previous 3 athletes, it is quite a bit slower, and there were quite a bit of stalls that kind of hindered the flow of his routine.
I agree, Alan. You can see that he's got a lot of athletic abilities for his degree of difficulties, but he is missing that martial element and that flow and that rhythm that you would usually see in the higher level Taolu routine. And
there's Michał's coach.
Waiting his score.
And his final score is 7.66.
And we see a series of deductions for his stance work, horse stance and bow stance, a few bobbles, and the out of balance, which is a 79, out of bounds code, which is a 79, and his hold, his bounce did not meet requirements. Next up, we have Moses Bobadilla Molina from Chile. This is Moses' second event of the competition, first being men's broadsword yesterday morning.
So in the men's Changquan event, this is where we see athletes who compete in both the straight sword and the broadsword come together, challenging each other during their bare hand routine, which is why we have a start list of over 80 competitors. Typically, a Wushu athlete will compete in 3 to 4 events, one being the bare hand, one short weapon, and one long weapon routine.
And the fourth one is a group event, a choreographed fight event
called the Doilian,
which there are about 2 or 3 other athletes are competing with them.
So there we see Moses. He's having quite a bit of problem completing his difficulty in terms of the transitions, his balance. So there we see quite a bit of swaying, which should definitely affect his mark, because the judges are looking for you to display very, very good balance and center of gravity in those types of movements, which is why they are placed and required movements in the routine.
And there we see Moses with a sweep into a crouching stance.
A butterfly kick into a front sweep, but again having trouble
with his balance. So here we have a replay of his first jump with a kicking leg just a touch shy of the shoulder height. And here's his jump inside into splits.
And again, you see the palm is not quite held straight. Certain requirements for that as well. So there could be a series of deductions that we will see in his score.
And there's his final score, 7.903. And there are those deductions we were talking about. Kicking height, loss of balance, horse stance, and splits, and the long time balance.
Here is our next competitor from Russia.
Elias Kuznatinov, who placed second yesterday morning in men's Taolu. So we're expecting a really strong performance.
The Russian athletes are typically very, very strong performers in World Championship competition. They have a very strong national team program. And would you say they're professional level athletes?
That's right, Alan. They are professional level athletes. They have a lot of support from their government. They have a lot of these athletes that are on the team compete or practice with each other as opposed to other recreational athletes. There's the jump outside 540 into a crouching stance. A little bit more uncommon in this tournament.
540-degree inside jump kick into a split landing.
Here's his balance.
Bit of a sway on the balance, so definitely the judges will catch that. And the reasons why there are those static balances in the wushu routines is specifically it provides the judges an area of concentration that they are specifically looking for in terms of the athlete's ability to display balance. That will definitely hurt his chances of placing in the top 3. Going into his final combination, a slap kick, hammer fist movement into the required empty stance. So an overall strong performance by Elias. However, as we saw, that loss of balance will definitely hurt his overall mark.
And Alan, does it make sense to reattempt the balance if you sway the first time?
Really, it is not, because during a athlete's routine, he has to indicate to the judges where and when he will perform that compulsory balance. So they're already looking for it. And if you miss it out, at the end of the day, you will lose that mark regardless. So to try to attempt it again is really
a full 2 points, and 1.6 needs to be a difficult movement, and 0.4 needs to be a transitional landing.
And the transition sometimes refers to the connection between difficulty movements, and as well sometimes refers to the stoppage or whether or not the athlete successfully lands that movement. Often in a horse stance, a bow stance, or in some cases that crouching stance. And here is a lotus stance, one of the transitions.
And carefully into that empty stance, which looks a touch high. And like the other balances, that stance requires the thigh to be parallel with the carpet, as in this case.
Here we see a slow motion replay. He chooses to do a reverse front slap kick into an aerial kick. So would that be judged and considered the same as a regular front jump kick followed by aerial kick?
That would be. What we're really trying to look at is the connection jump. When you're doing a jump front into an aerial, there can only be one step afterwards, and in this case, he did meet that requirement.
His final score, 8.656.
Next up from Malaysia, we have Wensan Wong. We're off to a fast start. Straight into jump outside 720 into horse stance.
Very good rotation. Very clearly, he achieved much more than a 720 rotation on that, which is what you want to showcase to the judges. So it is a no doubt completion of the rotation. There is his long-term balance. And as you can see, that thigh was clearly low enough. Very good speed and rhythm to his routine.
Comparative to the other athletes, very sharp and very steady with his movements. And there's the optional jump. As we were saying, this doesn't help the athlete in terms of the difficult requirements, but is very helpful when it comes to overall performance. At the same time, very risky, because if they miss that jump, it could hurt their score.
Going into his final combination. Empty stance. And his finish. Very strong performance by Wensan Wong of Malaysia. He completed that 720 outside jump kick with ease. And is one of the more difficult movements in Wushu competition, even on a difficulty standpoint. His final score, 9.656, currently placing him in first place.
And that's going to put him on the standing for top 3, and there's because we've said 9.6 is where the standings are going to lie.
So he is under consideration for sure. But today with Changquan having over 80 athletes, there is going to be some heavy competition in this event.
That's right. There's still some potential for a lot of the athletes to catch up.
As we saw yesterday in the men's Nanquan with 54 athletes, there were several competitors scoring much higher than 9.6. And that was because of the level of competition and the quality of the athletes in that particular category.
And next up from Mexico, we have Ivan Avina Mendez. This is Ivan's first event of the tournament. The last 10 athletes we've seen already in men's Taolu. So Ivan must be a straight sort of competitor. So Ivan's very clear with his power. At some points you can see his shoulder being a little bit too tight, his movement's a little bit too small.
And combinations such as that is one of the more popular, and I would almost say a compulsory combination in the routine for the athletes to display the punches, the strikes, what we call the fist movement, the palm movement, the hook movement. And as well, what is required in a routine is an elbow, a sweep, a straight leg kick, and as well a bent leg kick. And what we mean by a bent leg kick is a thrust kick, such as a heel kick, a snap kick, or a side kick. And these are the components that make up the Changquan routine.
And there we see a side kick fall, which in this event is optional. So this being the most competitive event of the championships, a lot of these athletes are looking to stand out with a lot more optional jumps and movements. And there we see his final score, 8.650.
Several deductions on his Group A merit and one deduction on his Group C transition movement. And an easy way we were talking about yesterday to understand the deduction codes is that they're grouped, that there are numbered groupings for each type of deduction. Is that correct, Anthony?
That's right, Alan. The judges arranged the codes by the type of movement. So the 1 code, which covers from 1 to 10, is in reference to the balances, and the 2 code is with reference to the legs.
So anything that starts with the number 2 is usually a leg deduction.
Correct.
And what might that be?
And what we're looking for in this case would be the splits, the back sweep, the front sweep, and the snap and thrust kick, as you were mentioning.
So those would be codes that are, for example, 21, 22, or 23. Yep.
And the more common one that we will be seeing here are the 30 and the 50 codes. The 30 in reference to the jump and the kicking height, and the 50 being the stance work.
So anything leading with the number 3 is in reference to their jumping ability.
Correct. And here we have Japan's Jin Mifune. To butterfly twist. Jump inside 720.
A little bit low on that jump. He got enough rotation just at the end, but didn't have enough time to really nail that landing clearly.
Yeah, and you can see the width of his horse stance, which is a little bit small, and the requirement is to be
shoulder width.
Shoulder width.
Aerial twist, front slap kick, side kick, hammer fist into the required elbow. He's having good speed even towards the 3rd and 4th section of his routine. But he had just a little bit of difficulty making it very clear on his jumps. And although they might not be deductions for his Group C mark, he might be deducted or might affect the overall performance mark.
And so far we've seen some of his stance work too, a little bit small. The foot angle in that crouching stance, you can see that his front foot was a little bit far forward.
That was Jin Mifune of Japan.
And there's that jump outside 540. And in this angle, we can see that his kicking leg was a little bit low, and in that landing, his horse stance was a little bit high. Final score for Jin, 9.53. Next up, from Canada, we have Dylan Liu.
Dylan also performed in the men's broadsword or the Daoshu yesterday and is a competitor in the men's Gunshu.
Jump
There's
outside
a
540. Into
slight stumble
yep.
on the transition or the landing. Front jump kick, aerial kick, inside 360 into a horse stance landing, followed by outside 360 into a horse stance landing. Here Dylan goes into his cross-legged balance. This is Dylan Liu's first World Championship competition.
So we see some kicks and some strikes into a sweep. Dylan showcasing the martial intent of his movements.
So here in field of play number 1, we're watching the men's Changquan long fist event. Myself and Anthony Chen in field of play number 2. We have the women's Daoshu or broadsword taking place at the moment. And Dylan's final score is 8.993. A code 70, which represents that loss of balance, and as well a code 23, which we were talking about earlier, is for a kicking type movement, correct, Anthony?
That is in reference to a snap kick or a side kick, and
the height of the kick, right?
The height of the kick and the full extension of the kick.
leg.
Yep. Next up, from USA, we have Naoki Tang, 16 years old. He's only been practicing wushu for 5 years. Very competitive athlete.
How many competitors are from the U.S. in this event particularly today?
In this event, we have about 3 competitors. Every country is allowed to send 8 athletes.
4 men and 4 women.
That's correct. And it doesn't matter which event they decide they want to compete in. In this case, we have 3 males competing in, or 4, sorry.
All four are competing in Changquan.
Jump outside 360.
He sets up for his balance, and he's not doing the cross-leg balance. Oh, he is. So he sets up for that. They have to hold this for 2 seconds.
Here he sets up for his back sweep into a
Crouching
crouching stance.
stance. And what are we looking at for that crouching stance to allow the athlete to get their full mark?
So on that crouching stance, the athlete is required to have his thigh and his calf be in contact and the extended leg to be completely straight. As well as the 2 feet have to be parallel or within the 135 degrees of each other. That was USA's Naoki Tang. This is his first adult World Wushu Championships. Not a bad performance. There we can see in the replay, his kicking leg well above the shoulder.
Is that his coach, Anthony?
Yep, that's his coach, Tina Han. Naoki practices in Northern California, up in, I believe it's Fremont.
And we await his final score. And currently in the standings, we have Malaysia in first place. We have in second place
Japan with Jin Mifune, and it looks like Naoki is in third with a 9.466.
And our next athlete is Samuel Mack from Great Britain.
And I've noticed this is Samuel's second World Wushu Championships as an adult, but you said you've seen him before in other...
That's correct. Samuel began Wushu at an early age, and he represented Great Britain at the first Junior World Championships, where I believe he was a gold medalist in Changquan. Having a few unique combinations to demonstrate his first set of difficulty. Outside 540 into a horse stance. Front jump kick, aerial kick.
And there he is with his bounce, the only one to do a non-cross leg bounce.
That is a reverse cross balance, lifting the leg behind. And I could say through Samuel's Wushu competition career, we have seen very unique choreography in his routines. And typically, the composure and the choreography of his combinations have been very different from many of the other competitors, which kind of sets him apart.
Especially in a pool of 80-plus competitors.
Butterfly kick. Towards the ending of his routine. Into the ending. There we see in the slow motion replay.
And there it is. He has a score of 8.963 with one deduction for a loss of balance. And it looks like he lost 0.45
on his difficulty. So that means that he either under-rotated or just did not complete that difficulty movement.
That's correct. In this case, a 0.45 is usually paired up with a B level score. 0.3 being the jump and 0.15 being a landing. Next up, from Rwanda, we have Kwizera Claudien.
We saw him in the broadsword competition yesterday.
And yesterday he was competing a compulsory routine, and we'll see if he'll be doing an optional this time.
I believe this is the Group A compulsory routine that he is doing. So again, I know that Rwanda in the continent of Africa, they have been developing Wushu very, very quickly in the last several years with support of the International Wushu Federation. And many of their athletes have begun training Wushu utilizing the compulsory routines. But having improved and having a great deal of participation in Wushu, we see many of their athletes begin now world level competition utilizing these compulsory forms.
That's right. I believe the last time the compulsory events were being used was in 2015 in Jakarta.
However, one of the only downfalls of using the compulsory routines is that they don't meet the requirements of the difficulty component or the Group C component in competition.
That's correct. And another one of the drawbacks of using compulsory is that everyone knows the routine, and it's very specific in terms of the required movements. Oh, and there it looks like he
Also
has a
lost
fall.
the balance.
Yeah. Once two hands touch the floor, that would be considered a fall, and we saw him put another hand down, so that is actually additional support. So in that case, he would lose about 0.5 combined. What's really cool about these compulsory routines is it covers a lot of required and traditional Changquan movements.
Sometimes a bit too many, because at that point you're demonstrating so many stances, so many horse stances, so many bow stances. It gives a lot of opportunity for the judges to deduct you, which is why that is one of the strategies in which when the athletes create optional routines, they actually limit the amount of stances that they do just to the bare minimum.
And final score for Kwizera, 5.750. And we see the missing C score, which is comprised of 2 points.
So that is why it's not a true reflection of his ability necessarily, but because he doesn't meet the requirements of the optional standards, it's an automatic 2 extra marks that are missing from his final score.
Next up from Argentina, we have Christian Arturo Carrizo. Here's his crouching stance, which is a little bit high. We can see that his thigh is not in contact with his calf. And the 540 jump outside horse stance with a bobble. And there's that aerial. And you can see that his leg has been bent to more than 45 degrees, and that's the requirement for making sure you don't get a deduction for the aerial.
So anytime the knee, if it's bent beyond a certain part, that's where you'll get a deduction?
That's correct. The legs, any of the legs for the aerial movements above 45 is considered bent, obviously bent. And there we can see I'm doing a series of stance work, which are also a little bit high. And there's jump outside 360 into a horse stance. Here's his cross leg balance. And in that angle, we couldn't see his supporting leg, but his other leg was on the parallel plane. There's Arturo slowing down. And finishing up his routine. And there's his front slap kick, which is also has been added to this year's World Wushu Championships as a deduction. And before, the judges were allowed to deduct if the slapping kick is below the shoulder during the jump, but now they can deduct it if it's on the floor. And there's his final score, 7.076. And there we see a series of deduction for stance work, height, loss of balance, the balance and long time balance deduction, and more stances, as well as the kicking height. Next up, we have Japan's Riku Mifune. I'm not sure if he's related to Jin.
It's quite likely because many siblings or family members often take up sport in the same sport.
That's right. We've already seen Italy's Domenico Giordano and Michele competing in different events, one in the northern and one in the southern events. Jump outside 720.
There's his elbow. 360 twist. Inside 360 jump kick into a horse stance landing.
There's a snap kick and setting himself into a cross leg balance. In this angle, we can see
a lot of determination in his expression.
Yep. And at that angle, you can see that his thigh is parallel with the floor.
Slap kick into a fan yu combination.
Very good display of rhythm and power. Jump front aerial into a roll.
Bow stance. Into a back sweep. Into an empty stance.
Strong performance by Riku Mifune. One of few athletes to pull a 720 rotation for his degree of difficulty. And there we see in the replay, there's that front slap kick above the shoulder. And final score, 9.603, putting him in second place. That pushes Jin to third. With Wen Sun Wong of Malaysia still in first. Next up, we have Amir Kassem of Egypt. He's competed at the last World Wushu Championships, where he was 4th place in double broadsword. In 2014, he was a gold medalist at the Junior Worlds in Nanjing.
Very nice outside jump kick. A very, very nice outside jump kick performed by Amir.
Very high butterfly twist into jump inside splits.
A slight loss of balance on his landing. So that would be considered a sway possibly.
Potentially. At that angle, we couldn't see it, but if he's moved his body forward and back, that would be considered a sway.
Amir demonstrating very good jumping ability in his difficulty, a strong cross-legged balance.
It might be a little bit shy in terms of the time. There's an elbow strike.
Back sweep.
Back sweep.
That the judges could be very strict on.
And there we see his final score, 9.203, with a deduction for that long time bounce and a bow stance deduction.
So the bow stance could have been that the knee was not in line with his instep, or perhaps his back leg was not straight enough.
That's correct. And next up, we have Malaysia's Su Wei Clement Ting, a very strong competitor in men's Taolu yesterday morning. He's placed 4th of 54 competitors. And there's Clement saluting the judges. Front stretching into an empty stance. Setting up for a jump. Jump outside 720.
Slight movement on that foot.
And jump outside 540 horse stance. A little more stable than the last one. Jump front aerial, and you jump inside 360 horse stance. Back sweep.
Hammer fist into his cross-legged balance. And he just can't hold it. But as we mentioned earlier, he tried it again, but it really doesn't make a difference at that point, does it?
No, it doesn't. Once the athlete attempts the balance, it's already considered an attempt. So if you do it you make an error, it's already a deduction. So if you do it again and mess up, it's another error. So at that point, the athlete is best off just continuing his routine.
And his drop stance, we see from that angle a little gap between his thigh and back calf.
And that was Su Wei Clement Ting of Malaysia. A very strong acrobatic competitor.
And I think overall, for the Changquan category, most of his movements were performed very well in terms of strength, speed, rhythm. However, it is where he did not achieve the time requirements, or he had those losses of balance that will really hurt his mark.
And in my opinion, it could be due to his lack of experience on the world stage.
His final score, 9.093.
With 2 deductions for the bobble and a deduction for balance and long time hold. Next up, from the Philippines, we have John Dent, Rapata Gajo. John Zenth is a new athlete, 17 years old. He's already showed that he's a strong competitor, scoring 9.4 in yesterday's men's broadsword event.
Here he sets up. Outside jump kick, 540-degree rotation into a horse stance landing. Setting up a twist kick into an inside 360 jump kick with a split landing. Front stretch kick. Very good speed and power so far. Front jump kick, aerial kick, 360-degree kick into a horse stance landing.
His routine flows very well, very specific rhythm, and good display of flexibility and combinations. And it looks like there's a slight pause in after that butterfly kick into a sitting stance. Back sweep, front slap kick.
Combination to demonstrate some of the basic elements required, such as the fist, strike, and the elbow. And generally a very good performance by the Philippine athlete.
There's his 540 jump outside kick. You can see that kicking leg's just at the cusp of his shoulder height. And we're waiting his score. 23 of 89 competitors. Still ways to go. And final score, 9.20 with 2 deductions.
One for a loss of balance, and the second code 21 would be a leg technique, correct?
That's correct. That is for the back sweep. And it was probably because his sole left the floor when he was doing the kick.
Is there also a rotation requirement on that back sweep?
There is no rotation requirement in this case. If there's any rotation requirement, that would be observed by the Group C judge. But in this case, this sweep is not a
Difficulty
component, as opposed to the front sweep, which is a degree of rotation difficulty.
So technically on the back sweep, as long as they crouch down enough and keep their knee straight and their toe along the ground, it doesn't matter whether they complete a 360-degree rotation or more or less?
That's correct. And next up, we have New Zealand's Joshi James Liu. He's only 12 years old. He's competing in last year's Junior World Wushu Championships.
And his attempt at a balance, but not quite powerful enough and
Stable.
Perhaps not as stable as it should be for a balance.
And it looks like he might not have met the time requirement. And the time count only starts when the athlete stops moving. So even if the athlete is moving into it and it takes 2 seconds, that would not count.
There's a drop stance.
Let's jump outside 360 with a shuffle. There's a back sweep. You can see his foot come off the ground, and then 2 hands on the floor, which is considered a fall. That's a 0.3 deduction. And as we were saying,
when they touch their hand onto the ground.
That's correct. And as we were saying, most of these Group A deductions are worth zero 0.1, with the exception of a additional support where the hand or a weapon is supporting the body from falling, and that's a zero 0.2. And if the weapon breaks, it would be a 0.2. And the only 2.3 deductions would be if the athlete puts two hands on the ground or there's a clear fall, as well as a drop of the weapon.
So I think it's fair to say it's very important for the athletes not to fall down on the ground.
Exactly. There we see his jump inside splits. And then we see his final score, 7.826. A series of deductions for kicking height, balance, shuffling, horse stance, sweep, and the fall. Next up from Chile, we have Ariel Mancilla Barrientos. Ariel's a veteran of the World Wushu Championships, competing as early as the 13th World Wushu Championships in Jakarta.
And that's one of the differences in a sport like Wushu, that what goes along with the maturity of the athlete is their ability to demonstrate the martial aspects or the application of offensive and defensive techniques. Because definitely you want to showcase the accuracy, the power, the speed in your strikes, but as well the intention of your strikes. So with maturity comes that ability to demonstrate that during a routine. And we saw that very, very clearly with one of the younger athletes versus, say, one of the more seasoned or older athletes in the sport.
And here we can see Ariel has a lot of expression in martial intent.
That's right. He watches and looks at all of his hand movements. He visualizes where he is kicking. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people who are not familiar with Wushu might ask is all of the slapping of the kicks and the hitting of the hands. Really, it's to demonstrate that control and ability to target your strikes at an intended target.
There he is finishing with a back sweep.
Into a hammer fist, drop stance,
and then an empty stance. Fairly common combinations to put your stance work at the end of your routine, just not to disturb the flow of your routine.
It's an outside 540, aerial twist. Inside jump kick, but he missed the transition on that.
On that landing. I think he might have missed the rotation as well, just by a little bit. Let's see what the judges think. And we were talking yesterday about the degree of difficulty differences in terms of steps between different disciplines. Yesterday we were watching Tai Chi, and a lot of these athletes were only attempting their jumping requirements with just 0 or 1 step.
Correct. In the different disciplines of, for example, Changquan or Tai Chi Chuan or Nan Chuan, there are slightly different requirements to how an athlete approaches a jump. In the Tai Chi Chuan, an athlete is only allowed a maximum of 2 steps going into a jump, but whereas in the Changquan, you're allowed 4 steps into a jump.
That's correct. And depending on what kind of connection movements you do, it can be a 0 or up to 4 step requirement. Next up, we have Suwei Joan Lim of Singapore. He's our bronze medalist from men's Taolu. And there we see Joan, very determined and concentrated. Expression is a big part of the sport of wushu. It helps show the martial intent and the power of the athlete. And there's his first jump inside 720, jump front into jump inside 360, jump outside 540 horse stance, jump outside 360, well over rotation. And here he is moving into his cross-leg balance. And looks like his height requirement and time is met.
Using a hammer fist leading into the next combination. Good strength in his elbow. Front slap kick. He's demonstrating very good speed and power, and that is through these non-difficulty movements, but just strictly martial art combinations.
Jones has really good rhythm and control of his power and speed. There he throws in an optional rotational fall. Very strong snap kick.
Back sweep. Drop stance. And there's a second elbow. So that's just one of the required movements that an athlete must demonstrate is a fist, a palm strike, a hook movement, an elbow movement.
And there's no limit to how many times you do these movements. But as we said earlier, there's a lot of strategy in making sure you don't do too many where you're not paying attention to its requirement.
And actually, many of these compulsory components or requirements must be demonstrated and initiated to the judges prior to competition. So they actually know where you are placing these types of movements and where to look for them.
There's his final score, 9.340 for Suwei Joan Lim.
He had one deduction for the transition of his first difficulty combination, and as well a code 51 deduction, which is for his horse stance.
So it's the same deduction in 2 different judging panels. It looks like we are taking a quick break. They have completed field of play 2, and looks like we'll be continuing shortly with Spain's Vitor de la Plaza Schneiper.
We're reaching just about the halfway mark.
There we have the current standings. We have Malaysia. Malaysia's Wen San Wang with the 9.656 in first place. Riku Mifune of Japan, 9.603 in second. And Jin Mifune of Japan with a 9.530. And we still have about 50 more athletes coming up soon. And it looks like we'll be continuing with the awards ceremony from Field of Play 2 with women's Swangjian, double straight sword, and women's broadsword.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to begin the awards ceremony for the women's Strongman event.
有请获奖运动员和颁奖嘉宾入场。
Let's welcome the medalists and presenters to the podium with a warm round of applause.
让我们一起有请国际武术联合会执行委员会委员汉克·瓦舒亚先生。
And here we have women's double straight sword with Canada taking the bronze, Macau taking silver, and Israel with the gold.
铜牌获奖者
Third place, bronze medalist.
来自澳大利亚的 Eric Jia Ili。
Eric Lee from Canada.
If you're still streaming on Field of Play 1, we are streaming the award ceremony in Field of Play 2 with Mario Martinez and Paula Amidani. And we're back here in field of play 1 with men's long fist category.
And as we continue with our athletes, now we have our next competitor from Spain. This is Philip de la Plaza Schinapper. Few strong combinations to start off.
Into that bow stance.
Continuing into a outside 540, just short of the rotation there.
And didn't quite hold that horse stance.
But even if he did hold the horse stance, because the rotation was not enough, he would not get either the movement nor the transition mark.
That's correct. And in that case, we would be looking for the Group A deduction, which would be to see if his thighs were parallel.
Aerial twist. Legs were quite bent on that movement as well, so likely he would get deducted for that.
And dependent on the angle of the 3 judges watching, the degree of difficulty, we'll see if he gets deducted. And there's a drop stance.
So in general, a good routine. However, he is missing quite a few elements on those required movements and difficulty components.
That's correct, Alan. Being that there are 89 competitors, it's very competitive, and just a few mistakes would take you away from the top. And there's Victor finishing off with an empty stance on the left leg.
Another elbow. And his completion.
There's a replay of his aerial, followed by his jump inside. 360.
Into a horse stance, but even there on a slow motion, the requirement of the horse stance is thighs parallel to the ground.
And we're a third of the way through our men's Changquan competition. In field of play 2, they'll be changing their focus onto men's Tai Chi Jian.
And as we continue here, we have Victor scoring 8.633.
With 3 deductions.
One for the horse stance.
1 for that aerial bent leg that you just mentioned.
That's a 26.
Yep.
That's a code
32.
A code 32 for the bent legs on the jump. So anything with a 3 in front of it is for aerial component.
Correct. And then we see the 26, and that is a single leg bounce. That requires the knee to be above the waist and the raised foot to be hooked inwards. Next up, we have Korea's Sungjae Cho, a very strong competitor. Just a month ago, he was competing at the Cheongju Masterships, in which Korea hosted, in which he scored a silver in this event and a gold in men's broadsword. And we missed him in the broadsword event. It seems like he pulled out, but this is his stronger
of the
routine.
2. Setting up, 360 twist. Inside 720, but a fault on that landing. Very nice back layout twist. So there, we have a display of an optional movement, although it's not scored as difficulty because he didn't perform it very well. It does add quite a bit of flair to his overall performance.
We saw him throw another B-level technique, aerial twist, and here's his back sweep into a crouching stance.
But that's an example of having harder difficulty, but because he faulted on that 720, that would cost him a lot of marks on his final score.
You're right. In that case, he would, if he did not meet the rotation and the transition, it would be a 0.6 deduction. Jump front aerial to jump inside 360 horse stance, and there he has got a shuffle and skip. Jump outside 360, rotation touch short, jump front.
Jump kick, lotus stance, but he did not quite sit properly there. And you see he lost his balance, so that would not count as his transition. It would be a failed attempt.
Back sweep to crouching stance. There's Oscar with the round off back layout. Oh, and there's an additional support. I wasn't quite sure there, but if you put two hands, that would be considered a fall.
So he's having a lot of trouble with that lotus stance. It might not be the best thing to place it into the routine if you find that you're having trouble with certain transitions.
I think what a lot of athletes don't realize is that the sitting stance requires a lot of flexibility, and it's easy to complete in a practice setting, but on a competition level, usually you're a little bit more shaky and not as controlled.
Because there's a lot more pressure involved during competition, and if you're not having the proper flexibility to do a particular movement, it is quite difficult.
Now we just saw in that replay, the back sweep, his sole leaving the carpet. Again, this is Bolivia's Oscar, and there's his final score, 7.306. The Bolivians sending 4 male athletes and 1 female athlete to this year's World Wushu Championships. Next up, athlete 33, we have Sayed Mohammad Hosseini.
A very strong
Iran.
athlete from Iran. He performed quite well in yesterday's broadsword event.
That's correct. He's scored a 9.513, putting him in the top 9.
And what you will see in the higher tier of Wushu athletes is that true demonstration of power and intensity.
There's jump outside 540 horse stance. And there's that intense, as you were talking about, Alan, a lot of power, strong and consistent flow.
Speed in the kicks. And the ability to really demonstrate the application and the targeting of all of the strikes and blocks. Here is a demonstration of balance.
Very nice cross-leg balance. Very clear in terms of the height and the hold itself.
A little tight on the shoulders on those arm wheel movements.
That's right. You can tell his movements were a little bit small and not as open. And one of the key elements of Changquan is to make sure that all your movements are more open and spread out.
That's a demonstration of the range of motion that you want to showcase in the discipline of Changquan. Into his final jump, butterfly kick into a lotus stance. Outside kick, side kick into an empty stance. Final position.
To a finishing horse stance. And that was Iran's Sayed Mohammad Hosseini.
Very good
nice.
inside jump kick. Good height, good power. And that's what you want to see, that in showcasing those difficulty movements is not just a jump, but a kick. It is a jump kick. So a demonstration of the target and the power behind the movement. And a very, very respectable score of 9.606, currently putting him into second place.
That pushes Riku Mifune down to third place. 0 deductions for Hosseini. Up next from Australia, we have Reagan Lamb. Australia sent 5 male Taolu athletes and 3 female. Starts up off with a jump outside 540 horse stance, and you can see that he's bobbled right there.
And as well, it was very clear on his horse stance. You see the direction and alignment of his toes. It doesn't meet the requirement of being straight. And the judges typically give a leeway of about 45 degrees, but that is definitely much beyond that leeway, and he would get deducted for that as well. But Anthony, let me ask you, in determining the criteria for the horse stance, I know there's about 5 requirements, but say an athlete doesn't meet the requirement of more than 1. Would he get deducted twice on just that one stance, or is it just 1 deduction?
The athlete will only get deducted for 1 of the 5. He would get deducted whether it's once. Whether it's 2 or all 5 criteria, it's only being deducted once.
Okay.
This way the athlete's not penalized for more than one thing.
But say he does the horse stance more than 1 time in his routine,
Then
could
he could get
be deducted multiple
again.
times.
That's correct. There we see Australia's Regan Tan. Those shuffles in his landings are going to cost him. That would be a double deduction actually in Group A. And as we were saying, he will get deducted only once for the stance, but because he shuffled, that's a separate code. And the 70 is in reference to how the athlete is balanced, or the weapon, or anything related to the uniform. There's his final score, 7.756, and we see his deductions for loss of balance
And the
horse stance.
transition in the Group C category.
Next up, from Belgium, we have Hendrik Bremer. Hendrik's one of the newer athletes in this competition. This is his first World Wushu Championships. Jump outside 540 to horse stance, jump front aerial to jump inside 360 with 2 shuffles, and probably a deduction for his horse stance. Here's jump outside into horse stance, which the stance was a little bit high as well. And
Leading into his cross-legged balance, a little bit of bobbling there. What is the requirement for that? Is it that they're looking for you to look like a statue on that balance?
That's correct, Alan. There's first a height requirement, whether it's the supporting leg or the lifting leg or the torso. And in this case, the cross-leg balance, we're looking at the supporting leg being parallel with the floor, and the athlete has to achieve a 2-second hold the moment they achieve that height requirement. Here he's doing a back sweep, his foot lift off the ground, and his crouching stance, and you can see that thigh very far from that calf. Another stumble right there into a bow stance. And there's his empty stance at this angle. Very difficult to tell, but it looks like it's a little bit high. And that was Belgium's Hendrik Bremer. And now he's a fairly good jumper. We've seen him do a lot of the acrobatic movements, but he's having a lot of problems with stability and his connection landings. A lot of balance and flexibility. So it's not enough just to be very acrobatic in the sport of wushu, but also flexible and stable.
Correct. Those are the physical attributes that are very, very important.
And final score for Hendricks, 7.243. And we see a series of deductions, about 8 loss of balances, horse stance, bow stance, and empty stance, and crouching stance. A lot of his basic requirements being deducted. Next up from Italy, we have Domenico Giordano. Another strong competitor from yesterday morning's men's broadsword event with a score of 9.51, putting him in the top 10 of the 70 competitors.
And typically at the World Championships, a good standard or accomplishment for many athletes is being in the top 12, top 10, or top 8, especially in an event such as Changquan with over 80 competitors. Inside jump kick 360. He is getting the landing, but he's just not looking as stable as we've seen him before. Like you see these slight little wobbles in the movement, and it's a good indication of whether their strength or their balance is just not fully there. Aerial twist, however, it was not quite vertical and performed on a slight angle.
Here we see his bow stance, setting it for his back sweep into a crouching stance. Very difficult for the judges to see, considering his stance was facing forward, and the judges would be looking for the thigh and the calf connection.
And that's sometimes a strategy in terms of the athletes choreographing their routine to, so to speak, hide the potential error that might be performed in a movement.
Again, empty stance, facing away from the judges. And that was Italy's Domenico Giordano. There you can see he's not too satisfied with his performance. There we see his final score, 9.180, with 2 deductions, one for loss of balance or sway, and a 77, which is a 2-second hold deduction. Next up, we have Japan's Hibiki Beto. Jump outside 540 to horse stance. Stable landing.
And he sets up for his next combination.
Butterfly twist 360 into jump inside horse stance.
The toes are slightly out there. Do you think that's enough for a deduction, Anthony?
I think that's very close call. That will be up to 2 of the judges to at least confirm that. And there's his cross-leg balance. Very clear that he has met the requirement.
And that was a single-handed cartwheel. That does not count as a difficulty, correct?
That's correct. It's very important for the athlete to design his routine so the judges know that that was intentional placement of the hand on the floor.
Rather than a failed aerial attempt.
Correct. Here's his butterfly kick into a sitting stance. Still finishing strong with an empty stance, keeping the same intensity throughout his routine.